come to order. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Director Leonard.
Present.
Director O'Halloran has asked to be excused for tonight's meeting. Director Seamson.
Present.
Director Taylor. And Chair Garcia.
Here.
We have 4 committee members present, and Director Peterson is joining the committee as well.
Hello, welcome, Director Peterson. All right, the chair will now ask the secretary to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. The chair invites any members of the audience who wish to participate to do so, and asks that those who do not wish to participate to please remain silent during the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This meeting is being conducted in person from the Central Services Building. In order to allow as much public access and participation as possible, this meeting is also being broadcast via live stream on the MPS website and on the MPS YouTube stream, the links to which may be found on the MPS website on the broadcast page. Before we begin today's meeting, we have a short announcement regarding interpretation services for the Spanish-speaking members of the audience.
Buenas tardes y bienvenidos a la Junta Escolar de las Escuelas Públicas de Milwaukee. Si desea escuchar esta reunión en español, por favor llame al 312-626-6799. Nuevamente, 312-626-6799. E introduzca el número de reunión 608-130-5362. Nuevamente, el número de reunión es 608-130-5362. Gracias.
For each of our items of business, we will hold a discussion and public hearing. Those who wish to speak on tonight's items are required to register to speak in advance of the start of the meeting. When you are called upon to speak, please state your name and spell your last name for the record. I ask that if you are waiting to speak virtually to remain on the platform until you are called upon to speak. After a speaker's time is up, they may continue to follow the meeting at one of the broadcast options mentioned previously. For the sake of fairness and to give everyone a chance to speak, the chair reserves the right to limit the length of time allowed for any one speaker. Written testimony will be accepted for transmittal to the board. Send this testimony to the Office of Board Governance, P.O. Box 2181, Milwaukee, Wisconsin 53201, or fax to 414-475-8071, or email it to governance@milwaukee.k12.wi.us. Just as a reminder, Robert Rules of Order dictates that all comments should be directed to the chair of the committee. Also, any questions or requests, including those of the public, committee members, or of the administration, are to be directed towards the chair, who will determine the most efficient way to address them. Please be respectful of the democratic process adhered to by the board. For the safety of all and to ensure a good order of the meeting, harassment or intimidation tactics of any kind will not be tolerated. Anyone persisting in disrupting this process will be asked to leave or will be escorted from the meeting and not allowed to return. Also, no one other than members of the board, designated staff, and those who have been invited to present or participate in the items of business will be allowed on stage before, during, or after the meeting of the board and its committees. Also, for a listening audience, if you wish to access this evening's agenda items and attachments online, you may do so by visiting the meetings, agendas, and minutes page on the MPS website and choosing online agendas. Now let's begin. Madam Secretary, what is item 1?
Item number 1 is a report with possible action regarding the discipline, disproportionality, and progress. This is an informational item, and although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Thank you. Would the administration please present this item?
Yes, Chair Garcia and members of the committee, the item before you on this evening's agenda and this monthly report regarding discipline, disproportionality, and progress. We have John Jagman here with me to provide an overview and guide us through the presentation, and after which we'd be more than happy to entertain any questions that you may have. John.
Thank you, Dr. Posley. Chair Garcia, members of the committee, John Jagman, District's Discipline Manager. As always, we want to center ourselves in the 5 priorities for success. Specifically, we are looking at how we are improving district and school culture, which ultimately will lead to increasing academic achievement and accountability. This year, our monthly reporting will look at 4 focus areas: providing proactive supports and interventions, strengthening student, staff, and community collaboration, reconceptualizing the role of school leaders within discipline, and developing staff integration of courageous conversations about race. So I will now go through our monthly report looking at updates in each of those 4 areas. First, under providing proactive supports and interventions, every month we are providing a best practice from the Culture, Climate, and Alternatives to Suspension Toolkit. In the month of November, we specifically were looking at some classroom strategies. The 2 we were focusing on were validating and affirming and building and bridging students, or often called VAB. This is part of Dr. Shraki Holly's framework. We also looked at increasing opportunities to respond and using that academic engagement as a best practice for classroom management as well. We also updated and shared some resources around cyberbullying and digital citizenship resources. At the October PACE meeting, that was a question and a request from the board looking at how we are supporting schools and students on cyberbullying and what is called digital citizenship and how we are engaging online. So we provided some updated resources online and through the discipline champions at each school. Classroom Organization and Management Program, or COMP, workshops were offered to school staff, and Foundations of Restorative Practices professional development was offered to school staff. Looking at our Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions within the PBIS framework, year to date, you can see the interventions that we are providing to students. Check-in, check-out is the most predominant in the first intervention support. You can see that there have been over 1,280 students that have received this intervention as a way to support their needs. The second focus area, strengthening student, staff, and community collaboration. Student discipline committees were met at all middle and high schools. Some of the predominant topics of discussion in November were around relationship building, looking at specific school policies and practices, and students discussed some instructional practices in their classrooms. We also held our quarterly community conversation in November. This topic was elevating student voice. So we had some breakout rooms, and we talked about how we are elevating student voice across the district, and we had a discussion around what are some other opportunities of engagement of student voice. Then we had collaboration with school-based teams. Every school has a PBIS Tier 1 team, a building intervention team, a learning team. Then they are embedding restorative practices in some of the work of Black and Latino male achievement, and we have Nate Deans here to talk a little bit about that here shortly. Also, looking deeper at some of our data, we are looking at administrator alternatives to suspension. So these are for behavior referrals that have reached the school principal or school assistant principal, and what are those strategies that they are utilizing when we are not engaging with a suspension. You can see counsel is the most common at over 1,200. We have conferences, detentions, mediation, a referral to the building intervention team, support staff, a repairing harm circle within the restorative practices framework, and having a restorative conversation with individuals involved. We also have that monthly reflection from school leaders where they specifically identify how they, as the school leader, are supporting school climate and what next steps are they going to do. The most predominant choices were discuss best practices as staff, practice a specific procedure with students, share various best practices that they are learning about at PLI, and focusing on community building with students and across staff and students. Looking at our data analysis, Our district enrollment is 50% students are identified as Black, 28% Hispanic, 9% white, 8% Asian, and other demographics. Looking at our year-to-date suspension events, we are at 81% of our suspension events for Black students, 13% for Hispanic, 3% for white. Then we have our November suspensions. For the month of November, we were down about almost 600, or a little over 600 for year-to-date from last year. So we are down over the month of October from last year, and we are down in the month of November from last year. So we are trending in the right direction there. Then you can see suspensions by racial demographic, totaling that 2,204 for the month of November, and then by grade level. We are looking at the highest trends of 8th, 9th grade for those suspensions as well. Then the fourth focus area is developing the staff integration of courageous conversations about race. We are continuing with those courageous conversations about race on a regular basis. We actually had one tonight up from 4 to 5:30 right before here, engaging school teachers in that process of learning about that framework. All staff who attend that have a kind of a check-out reflection, next step, what would they provide as support, and reflection on their time spent. So I wanted to present some data on the experience of those individuals that are attending those sessions. You can see around 90% are saying they agree or strongly agree in all of those areas, that they are finding that time well spent, they are increasing their knowledge, they are increasing their capacity and will for this work. We also ask participants what various next steps would they like to engage in, and they can select more than one here. But we are seeing that a lot of them are looking at sharing example conversations, so creating modules and creating kind of like case studies, examples of conversations they could have back in their spaces, sharing articles, and some self-paced modules and collaboration opportunities. So we are ensuring that staff, once they attend, are engaged in that work in those subsequent opportunities back at their building or in their department. And then also within developing staff integration of courageous conversations about race, we have our district equity leadership team. This has members of departments across the district here in central office, meeting monthly to talk about race, to talk about racial equity. In November, we explored our mission and vision, looked at alignment of work, because we have individuals across the district. Some of us aren't sure what each other are doing, so we talked about alignment of work, and we are reviewing departmental practices within that lens of race. We are also continuing our, what they call LEADS series. It is the Leadership in Equity and Anti-Racism Development. School SSTs and district instructional coaches have been attending that. That is a 6-part series. Session 5 was in November. Session 6 will be in December. Session 5, we specifically explored the 3 C's of whiteness, which are the color, culture, and consciousness. And we looked at how that kind of plays a role in our leadership, that all is about our own personal leadership in this work. Some next steps for December, continuing with highlighting a best practice from the toolkit. Our December focus is going to be restorative strategies. We kind of started that conversation in November around classroom strategies. We're going to add a layer to that and how strategies can be restorative and how we are making sure we restore that relationship with our students, families, and staff. We have additional courageous conversation exploration seminars. We have 2 or 3 a month. We will have that LEADS session 3 with SSTs, and we are organizing, because we are seeing which staff are interested in starting to get them engaged in a book, Learning and Teaching While White, Anti-Racist Strategies for School Communities, to kind of take that a step further for those who have engaged in courageous conversation about race. Every month, we are going to highlight a department and a school doing some of this work. So tonight, we are going to have the Black and Latino Male Achievement Department and Riverside High School. So I'm now going to turn it over to Nate Deans, the Director of Black and Latino Male Achievement.
Thank you, John. Director Garcia, members of the committee, Nate Deans, Director of the Department of Black and Latino Male Achievement. Here just to give a very brief overview of the work that we've done this school year. And so before you see our mission and vision, the Department of Black and Latino Male Achievement collaboratively works to improve the outcomes of Black and Latino male students within MPS by challenging systems, structures, and spaces of oppression, and seeks to create conditions that promote greater success. And so throughout this semester, I'll say, we have been really ensuring that our efforts are doing just that, in terms of reaching our young men in particular, but also ensuring that we're engaging with staff as well. And so continuing to make our efforts more available to them and giving them some of the cultural responsive strategies and techniques that specifically target our Black and brown young men. And so the vision of all of this is that Black and Latino boys and young men will possess an affirmed sense of identity, dignity, and self-confidence, and will have the necessary tools to triumphantly navigate K-12, college, career, and life. And so ensuring that the programming that we give, the folks that are responsible for carrying out the work that our team leads also are equipped to do the same thing. And so with that, that's the next one. So some of our key messages, I think this is essential, especially when folks consider the things that our department stands for and some of the things that we run into as far as asking for our services or asking for the things that we do. Department key messages that Black and Latino students are assets to our schools and communities. They always are the center and the focus of our work, considering some of the reasons as why our department exists. We try to make sure that continues to stay our focus in our lane. Black and Latino male students are not broken, the system is. And so really challenging those broken issues within the system to help promote success for our young men. Because as research shows that when you focus your efforts on some of the most marginalized groups within a school district, it actually improves the outcomes of everyone. And so really, I would like to say the work that we're doing is an effort to increase for all students by specifically focusing on the things that we do. BLMA is not a savior, but a partner in improving academic and life outcomes. I think a lot of the times that when we really talk about our department, there's a lot of things that we do around achievement. And so I just want to make sure that we highlight that, whether that's through our manhood development courses, whether it's through the coaching responsiveness work that we do with educators across the district. We're a hub of the work happening at the city, state, and national level. So having different community partners like Mentor Greater Milwaukee and the Milwaukee Bucks and things like that to help us with our efforts to ensure that these things are happening. And we aim to collaborate with both internal and external stakeholders. So as people approach us and they're about really ensuring that the work that we're doing for our Black and brown young men and boys of color within this district, making sure that's happening, right? Let me go to the next one, please. And so, so far, just within this semester, this is kind of the things that we've been doing. So we've expanded our high school mentoring from 7 or 8 schools that we're typically in into 12 of them, kind of encompassing both the north and the south side of Milwaukee, right? Expanded our manhood development course into 4 schools. So initially being at 2, but going into 4. And then our Buddies program, we've actually started a second cohort of that. And so having started out with 8 kind of core schools that we did last year, continuing that work into a different phase. So our phase 2, where they're going through some of our other guiding principles like academic success, cultural dignity, and leadership to become the leaders in their building as 4th and 5th graders. But then also circling back to a entirely different cohort of students, right? So making sure that we're doing that. And so with all of this programming, right, with all the things that we're doing, it's very critical because we can't be in the buildings every day to have folks that understand, not just the students, but also the educators as well, as far as the work that we're doing. And so what we do is, this year we were intentional about meeting with the staff, helping them to understand what it is that we stand for. Some of the same messages that I gave to you all, they also heard as well, as far as like key messages and essentials and the things that we need from them. And so some of that has been consistent, some of that has not. You can go to the next one, right? And so some of our ongoing activities, things that we were just able to engage in just this semester. Some of you may have saw that we had a mentoring kickoff at UWM where over about 200 students had the opportunity to talk to some campus leaders about college and career and life, but also just about our 12 Ps and how to exemplify those in schools. I mentioned the buddies, manhood, and the mentoring expansion, but also just connecting with different partners and creating new partners to make sure that the work that we're doing not only incentivizes our students, but they are meeting and targeting goals that we all have set, right? We were able to, the picture that you see is an example of the culturally collaborations professional development that we had over the summer where educators got a chance to really dig into Dr. Ghodri Muhammad's framework, and the uniqueness about this particular professional development was that students were present while teachers were lesson planning. And so we had a very unique experience doing that as far as like continue that work within our own PLI series and the things that we do for this district, right? And so you can keep going if you want. And so just some things that we have on the horizon. So doing some collaborative work with our sibling department, Gender and Identity and Inclusion, such as Denim Day and other events like the Mental Health Symposium. At the time that this presentation was presented, the Black Panther screening was on the horizon, but we did take about 100 or so young men to see Black Panther 2 and had a brief discussion around that. And so more events will be connected to that as well. We are also engaging in a dual enrollment program with Marquette to find 20 or so young men, seniors that would like the opportunity to gain some college credits, as well as continue some of the other things that I kind of already mentioned. And so I think that's the last slide for me. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Lasky.
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, Jeff Lasky, principal at Riverside University High School. Thank you for the chance to share some of the work taking place at Riverside. Year to date, you can see our total suspension reduction as of November 30th is by about 20%, with a specific reduction in chronic disruption suspensions by over 90%. During the 2021-22 school year, we worked to create an easy reference guide with teachers regarding classroom-based interventions to accompany our behavior T-chart. An example of what this looks like would be for an infraction such as refusal to work or noncompliance with directives. Some of the interventions that would be listed would include meet and greet, parent contact, one-on-one conference, behavior contract, and building relationships with students. The desired outcome of presenting school-wide concrete intervention strategies at the classroom level was in order to avoid classroom infractions becoming chronic and escalating to items that administration must address. This school year, administration has also put in place concrete intervention strategies that can be utilized when addressing infractions. These non-suspension interventions include one-on-one conversations, referral to supportive services, mentoring, peer or with an adult, restorative interventions with the party that was harmed by the student's actions, and parent involvement either by phone or by means of a meeting. The interventions named above focus on providing interventions at the administrative level. In order to provide administration time to conduct these interventions, we have assigned an administrator to oversee discipline concerns for each period in order to address these issues of discipline. This allows time to provide immediate positive interventions for students. Designating an administrator for behavior each period also allows other administrators to focus on instruction and operational duties that minimize behavioral concerns. This year has also been a school-wide focus on creating support for students' well-being through several avenues. We have developed a partnership with Sky Schools focusing on supporting 9th grade students as they transition to high school and deal with the pressures that go along with that transition. We have also focused on encouraging and growing clubs and athletic opportunities, such as the creation of a gaming group, a step team, and a male intramural volleyball league. Finally, we are trying to host additional events for students to socialize and bond as a community. This last weekend, we hosted our first ever winter formal that students attended. These events allow us to focus on creating a sense of community and belonging for the student body. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Committee. That finishes our presentation. We're now open for any questions or comments.
Excellent, thank you for that. Is there any public wish to make comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do have 2 individuals on the platform registered to speak and one person who is in person here in the auditorium with us that would like to speak. Would you like to go to the online platform first?
Is that okay? Yes.
Great. Okay, we will begin with our first speaker, Angela Lucas Foley. Please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony.
Angela Lucas Foley, Lucasfoley.
Thank you.
Good evening, Superintendent Posley, Chair Garcia, and directors. I come to you this evening as a white educator and as a proud member of RWE, Aspiring Anti-Racist White Educators of Milwaukee. I am focusing tonight's testimony on follow-through from our Board of Directors. To that end, I have specific questions related to the system's health of our district. Question 1, what is the impact of teacher shortage having on our buildings? Do you as directors know the number of student-facing vacancies in your buildings? As board directors, have you participated in courageous conversations about race exploration? If so, how are you applying this knowledge in your day-to-day work within the district? If not, will you commit to attending? As board directors, have you participated on the district equity leadership team? If so, what have you learned? If not, will you commit to attending? As board directors, have you visited your schools? Do you have a pulse on the climate in your buildings?
Madam Chair.
What are students, families, administrators, and teachers saying
Madam
they
Chair,
need?
the
And finally, as board
comments that you
directors,
are
how would you
hearing
rate the
are
overall health of our district?
different than what the item that we are
What
noticed to
individual
speak
people's
about.
stories have you collected to come to this assessment? Does your urgency within your role as director match the health rating you have given the district?
Ms.
As a member of the community,
Ms.
an
Lucas
MPS
Foley?
parent, and an aspiring anti-racist white educator, I
Hello?
have put my trust in.
Hello?
Madam Chair.
Yes. Thank you for those comments, Ms. Lucas Foley. We are trying to stay on topic on this specific board item. I do welcome you to submit those comments via online. That way all board members can read them. I think you raised some really great questions that I hope we can engage in the right topic. Is there more testimony?
Ms. Lucas Foley? One moment. Hello?
Did we lose them?
Hello?
Madam Chair, would you like to continue the testimony with that comment?
Were you able to hear my comments? Ms.
Yes,
Foley?
thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We look forward to reading your testimony.
Thank you. The next speaker on the platform is Michelle Hilbert. Please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony.
Hello, my name is Michelle Hilbert, and I'd just like to say it was impossible for me to hear the comments. I don't know if there's a way to do this better virtually, so like the time is paused, and maybe that will let the speaker know that they should stop talking, something like that to make this more streamlined. But my name is spelled Hilbert.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Garcia and board members, for this opportunity. I've been attending PACE meetings for a while as a member of RWE Milwaukee as well, and I'm a white educator. I'm glad to hear of all these new and goods, especially with BLMA. However, we still have concerns about some missing pieces. So one thing I'm wondering is what the board is doing to ensure accountability for the positive impacts beyond the board floor, specifically around climate and culture, student community engagement, and around specific building needs. For example, what has the board learned specifically from these student cohorts? In June, Director Taylor asked for a comprehensive plan for the 22-23 school year to address disproportionality, which includes a student cohort to look at the root causes of students with multiple suspensions. And it leads me to wonder what the board has learned specifically from these facilitated community conversations on November 9th, elevating student voice. The December report didn't really offer who attended or what specifically was discussed and how to more meaningful elevate student voice. How will that information be shared and applied? And if it wasn't valuable, that happens sometimes, what can we be doing differently? In September, at the 43-minute mark, Director Leonard stated that the goal is to change the culture in our buildings. And in this meeting and throughout many others, Directors Taylor's, O'Halloran, Chair Garcia each emphasized the importance of community partnerships at specific buildings. Specifically, how is the board assessing this process? Director O'Halloran offers an idea in March that she has a wish list for the high suspension schools, and then in August, she asked for a concise, publicized list of volunteer opportunities to address the myriad of needs, as she says. Where is that available? I couldn't find it on the volunteer website. What are we doing really to keep the community engaged? And if they aren't, what is keeping them at bay? All these questions lead us to wonder, what are the current assessments of the effectiveness of that 30, 60, 90-day plan referenced over and over in August? I didn't hear anything about it in October, November, and again, December. You said that was like, Chair Garcia said it like system changing. And what are we doing to assess the health?
Thank you. Yes.
Ask the speaker to come to the platform. Lucas Ware, please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony. Thank you.
That we have a high school that is relatively large, probably has, to a certain extent, driven some of our disproportionality, but I also would look forward to hearing from a school that is not part of the select criteria program, that does not require students to go through a process to become a part of their building, because we've been very hesitant. When I say we, I mean this body has been very hesitant to disaggregate data by school to, I guess, assuage concerns about enrollment. We don't know what schools are driving disproportionality, but I have a suspicion that it's many of our traditional, predominantly black North Side schools. I did want to reiterate as a member of ARWE some of the questions that Ms. Lucas Foley brought up. They were directed towards disproportionality, and I think that's so important that we're meeting back in person so that we don't gatekeep the conversation. We only get 2 minutes and 15 seconds. I think we deserve to be heard when we speak to this body. She was asking if you visited your schools and what's the pulse of the buildings, because climate and culture impacts disproportionality. When you have 6 schools that are struggling with their climate and culture, it's going to lead to more suspensions. I would extend that question to encourage many of us to visit some of the schools that have the highest suspension rates. And take a pulse of those buildings to try to figure out what can we do to try to support these schools. When you visit, again, how would you rate the health of these schools? Because that directly impacts suspensions. My school is not well. I'm a teacher at Obama SCT. It's not well. We need a lot of support. And I would encourage us to make sure we visit some of those schools. And I also want to re-highlight what Ms. Hilbert said right at the end about Director O'Halloran's proposal to take kind of an inventory of what schools with significant needs may be asking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Do committee members wish to make any comments or ask questions? Director Leonard?
I have quite a few going in all kinds of directions. I do want to bring up one thing that Ms. Foley had brought up, and this is something that I have been doing, going to our buildings, asking about staffing situations and where they are at, just talking to them. So when you start going to different buildings where when they do not have enough staff members, literally, I went to Burbank today, they are down 10 staff persons in that building. They are concerned. It is wearing them down. And as a teacher for 28 years, I know what that feels like. So there's no question, there's no mystery to how suspension rates will go up under those severe situations. I think we have to need to be very honest about that and open about that. I think that the first thing is to at least recognize that those staff members are going through those struggles. If we don't even recognize it, we don't put it out there in public, it's almost like hidden from them. So as a staff member, that's one thing. I have a lot, so I'm going to let you bounce around. You may want to ask some other people. I don't want to use up all of our time just for me, but that's one thing. There was one other thing, for Mr. Lasky. So you basically changed more of the way you handle suspendable behaviors by moving at it much more quickly. Did I understand that correctly?
Administration?
Chair Garcia, Director Leonard, members of the committee. What we did was work to create space to provide interventions that are not suspensions with administration immediately after that event.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right, any other comments or questions from committee members? Director Simpson.
Thank you, Chair Garcia. So one of my questions was actually going to be about the correlation between vacancies and, and an elevated, rate of suspension or disproportionality. Do we have information or data on that? Are we looking at kind of that as a reality?
Administration?
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, John Jagman, Discipline Manager. We can work on compiling that. Like, I wouldn't have that in front of me at all of that, but we could look at staffing in schools. We do, as part of our discipline disproportionality team, look at specific schools like came up. So, like, we do have that. We, again, don't want to present it at the board floor, but we do engage in these are the specific schools that we need to make sure that we address.
And for clarification, Director Simpson, are you asking for that report to be shared with us, the board?
Yes, please. Just for information, that would be helpful. And then I guess I have a couple of questions, but I guess one that I'd like to hear from Director Deans would be, in a report you were talking about systems that need, that are impacting our students in a more negative way. Do you have some specific examples of things that you are referring to, or things that you feel would be, that would need more of our attention, our focus, or more investment from the board?
Administration.
Sure. Director Garcia, members of the committee, Nate Daines, BLMA. I think we're kind of already having that conversation. I think most of the conversation that we're having around like the suspensions, right? Like it mostly directly impacts our young men. And so the relationship piece, right? When we talk about building relationships with students, that leads to all of these other disciplinary issues when we have the kind of like the cultural deficit or gaps that exist between the staff that our young men are in front of and, those relationships that are not existent. I think just building that. And so from us, it's all about like helping our young men to tell their stories and tell who they are and tell their side of things and the cultural kind of like gaps that exist and bridging those gaps. And that was the purpose of like doing our professional development. And so I think this is the conversation, that these people have brought up. Like that is like, for me, when we look at the disproportionality, it's our young men it impacts the most. And so that is the example, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. And then just one more thing in terms of Director O'Halloran's ask about, schools being able to sort of submit proposals about what they might do to benefit that suspension rate in their own schools. When will we be getting an update on that? I just don't remember.
Chair Garcia, members of the board, we have had a meeting with Director O'Halloran, and the work is on its way, and we are scheduled, to my understanding, to come back in March with that information.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Director Leonard?
So I tried to ask this once before. I don't think I did it successfully, and I'm afraid I might not do it successfully again today. So I'm going to try to put this together as mathematically as I can. I know that we don't want to show each school, and Mr. Weir, you brought that up, and I understand why we don't want to do that. I would love to see a comparison of, and I don't even need the names of the buildings, but a comparison of each building on the number of suspensions compared to the actual number of students, so we can get a better idea of what we're looking at. I think we give these ballpark figures, and they're okay. We're going in the right direction. I'm thrilled with that, so please don't get the wrong idea. But it would be good to see that there are, and I'm just throwing a number out there, there are 27 students in a building of 1,000 students or 600 students that are committing 65% of the suspendable offenses, and I'm just throwing that out there. I think it would be good to make a comparison and do a little bit more of a deep dive to see what we're really looking at. I especially think that's important when you start talking about mentoring and working with students, because as a teacher, there were times when there would be a student that got suspended once in the whole year or twice. That's not my concern, but when I have a student, and I can think of one person on the top of my head, he was suspended 13 times that year, and that's just that one student. That's a significant factor when you look at a building. So anyway, I don't know how you would put that together. It would be great if you could.
Administration?
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, we actually can do that, and we do that regularly, so we can make sure I can work with governance that you have it. Like, we look at a suspension rate, so it's suspensions divided by staff or student enrollment. We do also look at students with increased instances of referrals and other documentation. That is part of what the building intervention team does, is there is a metric that is specifically polled and shows the number of students with a certain number of referrals, and that is highlighting to make sure that student gets the intervention. But we can connect with governance to make sure that you all have that kind of analysis of what the suspension rate looks like versus their enrollment.
Thank you.
I'm good, thank you.
Excellent. And I do have a question, and this is for Mr. Deans. I know that you mentioned being at different schools doing professional development, specifically around conversations of, creating ambassadors or, just folks that are in the building that can really take the messaging and make it theirs and really roll it out and implement it. What are some of the challenges or barriers that you're noticing, as these conversations are happening with staff that you anticipate as, like additional support, additional training that we might need? Like, what is surfacing, during these initial stages?
Director Garcia, members of the committee, hey, Deansby LMA. I think before, I would say the staffing issue is one, right? So, like, obviously having the folks to do the work that we do, and then the mindset behind it. So, again, we were very intentional with letting people know what we were doing, right, within their buildings. And I know a lot of people, when they think of, like, the mentoring aspect, really the mentoring is a conversation about the larger piece. So what we would hope that is happening in the buildings is that the young men that are part of the conversations that we're having, the staff, everyone will see what's going on, and then that kind of will, like, sprinkle out, because we can't set up a mentor for every single student every single time. So really it's about the system. So kind of to also answer your question a little bit, like, that is the system. It's using those young men's voices and the things that are coming out of those conversations and the experiences that they are getting to further outreach, right, to further the impact. And so I think another issue too, though, when it comes to, like, the folks that we do have, and also considering that there are so many different issues, is like accountability as well, right? Like, how are we holding our staff, like when we're doing the trainings, when we're providing all of these services, when we're helping students and staff see, like, how to interact and integrate, whether it be curriculum, whether it be disciplinary practices, whatever the case may be, from our lens and from the key messages that we stand for, how do we hold those staff members accountable of how they're treating our Black and brown boys and young men? And I think that's like the biggest piece that's missing as well, is like, how do we create those systems now from a leadership lens, as you're getting all of this development, you're hearing our students, because we've hosted all of these different listening sessions. So like, now that you have this information and people to support you in that, who's going to hold you responsible for making sure that happens? And so that's the biggest thing, I think, when we think in terms of support, that you all can give, right? As some of the folks said, like showing up to schools and being there and being present to really make that influence and that impact. And when you see those relationships happening, knowing that there are folks in the building that are helping young men advocate for themselves and giving them the knowledge and the tools to be able to do so. And so how do we continue to further that message and further that impact and hold folks accountable that do the exact opposite of what we're doing? Because that's the layer in which we need the most work in. Because if we were doing that, yeah, it would be more impactful, I'll say.
No, thank you for that. And I raise this because I know that the work that we are doing is really hoping to, first of all, change the conceptualization for folks about discipline. And then obviously we're also asking for behavior change, right? After we change the mind and understanding of like, how are we reaching different outcomes, then it's really about, how are we implementing that and making that happen? So changing minds, changing practices. And I think that, a lot of the conversation that we have specifically in this committee really has those questions for us as board members of like, well, what can we really like hold on to that we're gonna like track and really hold accountable. And I think that has been the challenge for us as we are kind of naming the issues and really working with, the brilliance in the teams and educators and school leadership that we have on board is really how can we best support, the work that is being done. So, Mr. Jagman, thank you for all of the things that you're doing. I think what would be helpful for us to maybe inviting us to some of those district meetings that are already happening that are data dives around discipline. That way we can have a clear understanding as to, the figures, how things are done. Because I know that there's a lot of work that happens that doesn't necessarily get reported back to the board floor. And I know there's questions, from the broader audience and community around those issues. So yeah, thank you, and obviously to BLMA, and then for all of the work that, Mr. Lasky, you're doing at Riverside. This is not easy work, and we look forward to seeing how we can take those nuggets and really help spread that, throughout the district. All right. Any other comments? Yes.
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, two things I don't want us to forget here tonight. First of all, October and November, we've seen a decrease in the number of suspensions. There are some things that are happening that we talk about, the various schools that we bring forward. We brought Audubon, Vincent High School, and then tonight Riverside. So the idea that we are bringing a landscape of schools that we have, we are 100% open at any time to sit down, to discuss, to go through data, to walk you through. We have nothing to hide. So please let us know, and we'll be more than happy to go with you. We'll be happy to sit down with you to do a data dive, to show you any kind of data that you want to see on behalf of schools. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right, Chair Peterson.
Thank you, and I want to thank the community members who have spoken as they usually do, and that's good for the whole. Thank you, and also the board members. I just had a couple of comments and maybe a question is, we talk about the crisis really of not having a sufficient number of teachers to be in front of each classroom, which is a national crisis, but we're all working on that. It also, I think a lot of people think of it just in terms of teachers, but I know in talking to many of our colleagues in the schools and from my personal experience, when paraprofessionals are short, that's key, because if if its teacher has 25 or 30 or 35 kids in the classroom without an extra person sometimes, it's really hard to build that relationship or to counsel the kid, when you have the other students. And so I know that we've talked at different committees about the need to continue to push hard for our hiring. It's also in terms of, I know our health aides, I know we're short of them as well. And so it's, if we were had a full team, I believe that our suspensions would also decline. The one other aspect that hasn't been talked too much about tonight, and I was wondering if you might be able to comment on it, is the role of the lack of role of teachers who work with students with special needs. And I think we're trying to work on hiring those as well. And how are schools doing generally in terms of monitoring and assuring that those students are not disproportionately suspended?
Administration?
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, in terms of how we ensure those students are supported, we start with all students are reviewed at all times. Like when we have billing intervention teams looking at students, we have the tier 1 teams looking at it, they make sure that they are addressing all students can get an intervention. Every dashboard metric has that filter for special education. So that is part of their monthly minutes, is to look at, here's the number of students suspended, here's the number of black students suspended, here's the number of special ed students suspended, to make sure that the schools are kind of realizing that. So at the school level, and again at the district level, like Dr. Posey said, that is a regular metric. Anytime we share out data across the teams, one of the pivots that we have is those special education. So that is another area that we are always looking at.
Yes. Chair Garcia, members of the committee, I'm Matthew Boswell, Senior Director of Department of Student Service. And I would just add, I think our special education department does an amazing job really watching the goals, the IEP goals, doing a review, revise, as well as making sure that compensatory educational services are rendered when necessary. So I am fully confident and have always been very pleased with what our special education department has done for our district in making sure that those students, in terms of their educational services and their IEPs, are protected and serviced to the fullest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any follow-up? All right, thank you. Is there any further discussion? Okay. All right, Madam Secretary, next item, please.
Madam Chair, that was the last item on this meeting's agenda.
Well, there being no further business before the committee, this meeting is adjourned.